Okay, so I want to start over here. We came into the discussion explaining the Megilah. In the Megilah, it says that Kisheves HaMelech, the king settled down. When Achashverosh settled down, that's when he made the party. So it says that when he settled down, he made the party. What does it mean that he settled down? Actually, we're doing 11b. We're left at 11b. We're starting.
11b?
11b. Yud Aleph Amud Beis. 11b. Right? Correct? That's what I have it marked over here. Because the Gemara over here said that after he settled in, after Achashverosh settled in, and the Gemara says, it says, Bayomim Ha'im Kisheves HaMelech, when he settled in. And so Rava says, what does Kisheves mean? La'achar shenisyash v'daitei, after he calmed down. Why did he come down? So Rashi says, because originally he was worried that the Jewish people are going to leave him after the 70 years of the exile, of the Babylonian exile. So he was worried that they're going to leave him. So then he settled down. Why was he worried? We're in the middle of the whole calculations over here. So the Gemara says that before him, there was King's Belshazzar.
Right.
Belshazzar, he followed Nebuchadnezzar, and he calculated, the Gemara says, he made a mistake, and he calculated that the 70 years that the prophet has said that the Jewish people will be in exile were up already. And because he made that calculation mistake, he took out all the vessels that they stole, that they robbed from the Beis HaMikdash. They made a big party over there. And then the prophet comes to Belshazzar, and he basically tells him that because he used the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash, that's why he died right then. So Achashverosh said to himself that he miscalculated, because he calculated 70 years from when Nebuchadnezzar became king of Babel. But he should have really counted not from when he became king, but he should have counted from the times of the exile of Yehoiakim. So this is where we'll learn over here. We'll start just a few lines before we did last week. He says, Ano, I. This is who speaking? Achashverosh. He says, I, Chashivno, I will calculate, but Veloi Ta'ino, I won't make a mistake. Why? So he explains what the mistake is. Mi kesiv lemalchut Bavel. The verse does not say 70 years from the kingdom of Bavel. That would mean that you have to start the calculation from when the kingdom of Bavel started. But in the verse it says leBavel, 70 years for Bavel. Ksiv. That's where it's written. And therefore, my leBavel, what does it mean leBavel? It means legalut Bavel. It means when Bavel caused the exile. The exile took place after 8 years that Nebuchadnezzar was already king. So on the 8th year, so you have to sort of push it up for another 8 years. They started counting the 70 years from the beginning of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, but that was wrong, because the pasuk didn't say 70 years from the Malchut Bavel. The pasuk of Bavel, what it means is when the Bavel exiled the people. We have to count 70 years from the beginning of the exile, in which he exiled Nebuchadnezzar, exit Yechonya. How many years do we have left over? Kamo Bitziron. How many are left over? Tamani, 8. As I said, Nebuchadnezzar exiled the Yechonya, the first exile, 8 years after he became king, after he became the king of Babel, Nebuchadnezzar Melech Babel. So therefore, we started the 70 years from when he became king, but we have to start it 8 years later, from when he exiled Yechonya. He exiled Yechonya 8 years later. So the Gemara says, so how much is left over that we ended the 70 years 8 years early, Tamani, 8 years early. How much was left over from the 70 years that we still have to go through those years in order to get 70 from the exile? So the Mishnas Shtayim the Balshetzar. Balshetzar at his second year, that's when he made the party. He miscalculated. Second year to Balshetzar, he miscalculated and he thought the 70 years were up because he started calculating from the time that he became the king in Babel, but they were still short 8 years. So there's Tamani, there's 8 years short. How do we get the number 8? Because those are the Oison Shmoina Shonim. Those 8 years, Shemolach Nebuchadnezzar, that Nebuchadnezzar was king, Lifnei Higaloises Yechonya, before he exiled Yechonya. Shaloi Hoyo Loi LeBalshetzar Lemoino. Balshetzar should not have counted them, and he counted them because he counted 8 years from Nebuchadnezzar's when he became king. He shouldn't have counted it then. So Achashverosh said, I have other 8 years. I'm going to push it up another 8 years. Choshav. So he calculated. Who? Rashi says, Achashverosh. Achashverosh counted. Mi beis leBalshetzar at sholosh shaloi. Starting from the second year of Balshetzar, in which the mistake took place, that was the end of the 70. So he counted from Balshetzar till 3 years of his. The Ayil Chilufayu. He entered 8 years instead of the 8 years that he miscalculated. So he pushed it up 8 years. Hanach Tamane, these following 8 to Chusayhu, in their place. In the place of the 8 years of Nebuchadnezzar from his kingdom to the Golus Yechonya, he added another 8 years now. So which was the 8 years? Chodo de Balshetzar, 1 year still Balshetzar, because Balshetzar did the party on the second year. Because they had a Mishnas Shtayim, because from the second year, Sholmu Shivim Shon Lefiminyone. He calculated that his second year of Balshetzar, that's when he made the party, that was 70 years, and the Jews didn't go back. So that was his calculations. So Vishuv Mona Shlishi. So now he counts the third year. So we have 1 year of Balshetzar, because the 70 ended by the second year of Balshetzar. V'chomesh the Daryovish v'kodesh. On top of everything else, we have the names over here in the names over here change as well. So we call it Daryovish and Kodesh in the Tanakh to make it help with the confusion. It calls Daryovish and Kodesh, and as you will see, Rashi, when he says the 5 years, the bottom line is, I first want to say how he came up with 8. So he had 1 left of Balshetzar, was 5 years between Daryavish and Kodesh, and Tarti Didei, and 2 of his years. So you have 1 plus 5 is 6, and plus his is 8, which means 8 years instead of the 8 years that we miscalculated before. Ha Shivim. So you get to 70. I'm going to go back to the Rashi. And Kivon, the Chazi, once he saw the Molu Shivim, Ifrak, that there were 70 years and they weren't freed, Omar, he said, Hashta Vadai Sulay Mifarki. Now they're not going to be freed anymore because 70 years are up. Apik Mona Debei Magdisha. He takes out the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash, Vishtamesh Behu, and he uses them. Basotan Verikid Beineim. So the Satan comes and danced amongst them, which means Horeges Vashti, and killed Vashti. Again, so basically the mistake, Achashverosh thought that Belshazzar made a mistake and he was punished because that wasn't proof, but he has proof that the Jews are not going to be freed anymore because he made a better calculation. Belshazzar counted from when Nebuchadnezzar became king. But Achashverosh thought we have to start counting from when Belshazzar exiled Yechanya, which was 8 years later. So he took the 8 years that, and he added, and he said the 70 years added up 8 years later. When did they work out? 1 year of Belshazzar, because the 70 years ended as he calculated Belshazzar at his 2nd year of reign, but he was king for 3 years. So we still have to count the 1 year for Belshazzar. And then we have 5 of Daryavish and Kodesh. Who is the Daryavish and Kodesh? So Rashi adds Daryavish Hamadai and Kodesh Haparsi. Rashi just wants to distinguish so you know which Daryavish and which Kodesh we're talking about. Rashi will bring down later on that the son of Achashverosh, which was later on, he was also called Daryavish, and he was also called Kodesh. He actually had 3 names. So just to keep you confused, so they call him also Daryavish and Kodesh. But here, we're talking about Daryavish the Madite, and we're talking about the Kodesh the Persian. Those are the ones that kinged after Belshazzar. After Belshazzar came Daryavish. After Daryavish came Kodesh. After Kodesh came Achashverosh. Tarti Didei, 2 of here. As Rashi said, Tarti Achashverosh. Again, so the 8 years that he came up from the time that Yechanya was exiled, what were the 8 years? He comes out Choda the Belshazzar, 1 more year lived for Belshazzar because he counted 70 as his 2nd year. 5 years of Daryavish together with Kodesh, and 2 years of Achashverosh. Rashi says Chamish the Daryavish about the Kodesh Aparshu. Now we don't have exact numbers over here. That Daryavish, how much years Daryavish, how much years Kodesh. Rashi, the Gemara just says 5 years of Daryavish and Kodesh. And the assumption is now that between the 2 of them it was 5 years. The Gemara is going to change it later on, but right now the Gemara says like that. The Ksiv, the Gemara brings a pasuk that Daryavish became a king. It says V'Daryavish. The pasuk says V'Daryavish Madoa Kobil Malchusi. That Daryavish the Madite, he received the government. That was after Belshazzar. Ba'acharov, and after following Daryavish, Malach Kodesh Harishon, the first Kodesh. We call him Kodesh Haparsi, Rashi calls him. Shenosan Rishus Libnei Hagoyda Lalus. He originally allowed the people of the exile, the people of Babylonia, he allowed them to go up originally. What happened was that this was before Achashverosh. The Koresh, who followed Daryavish, the Madite, he allowed the people of the exile to go up, to go back up to Eretz Yisrael. He allowed them. However, as we're going to learn later on in the Navi, People complained, and then he rescinded, and he no longer allowed them. But he gave them later on. There was the king Kodesh. Rashi just wants to show you that there was Modai and there was Kodesh. There was two kings over there. Shanos v'shus Megilah. The reason we call him Kodesh Rishon because the second Kodesh was the second Kodesh. He was also called the son of Achashverosh, and he was also called Kodesh. So Rashi calls him over here Kodesh HaParsi. I'll call you back later, okay? Is Kodesh HaParsi. Shenemar. Shenemar. Koy Omar Kodesh. So this basically tells us that there was a continuation of the government, Balshazzar, Daryavish, and Kodesh. So the Gemara says, because Salka Daiton, Hashto, we think now, Shemolchu Bein Shneim Heishonim, there was 5 years between them. Afal Gavdelik Sibikron. There's no pasuk that says so, but we think it's 5 years. And now 2 of his years. Kvar v'tarti didei, tarti da Achashverosh. Those are the 2 of Achashverosh. Kvar overloy shteishonim. What does the pasuk say? What does the pasuk say? The pasuk says, Kisheves, Bayomim ha'eim, Kisheves hamelech. What does Kisheves hamelech mean? He come down. Why did he come down? Because he figured out 70 years have passed. The Jews have not been freed. It's a free-for-all now. That means that was when Bishnas Sholosh Lebolchay. This was 3 years, because 2 of his years was ended, 70 years. Once 70 years were finished, it came the 3rd year. The Jews were still in exile. They didn't go back yet. He says, you know what? They're not coming back. So what did he do? What did he do? Because he said they're not coming back. Kivan, the Chazi. So he saw the Malu Shivin, that their 70 years have filled. Veloy Ifruk. Veloy Ifruk means they have not been redeemed. Yukum Purkon, right? They have not been redeemed. 70 years. Omar, he said. Who said? Chashverosh said. Hashto Vadai Sulay Mifarki. They will know they're not going to be freed anymore. 70 years are up. They're not freed. They're not going to go out anymore. So what did he do? Apik Mone de Bei Magdasha. He took out the vessels from the Beis Mikdash. How did he have the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash? Because Nebuchadnezzar robbed the Beis Hamikdash, and when he took in exile, he took the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash as well. So he took out the money. Money means the vessels, the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash, the Beis Mikdash, v'shtamash b'hu, and he used them in the party that he made for all the people. He showed off, and he used the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. Like the Gemara, Satan v'rikad b'neim. Satan came and danced among them. That's just an expression of saying he got punished. The Satan came and danced among them. B'horag Vashti. So he killed Vashti. But the Gemara wants to know, so what was his problem? V'oshapir choshiv. But he counted correctly. How come we weren't redeemed? How come the Jews did not get freed, since he counted 70 years from the Galut of Yechonia? The Jews should have been freed. Why? What's wrong? I told you before, we mentioned it several times, that there were 2 exiles. There was the Golus Yechonia, and then later on, 11 years later, followed the Golus Yehoiachim. During the Golus Yechonia, there was still a lot of population left in Jerusalem. Only later on, today we are the Sarah B'Tevis, and we are commemorating the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. During the first exile, he did not destroy the Beis Hamikdash. And did not destroy Yerushalayim. During the first exile, the Beis Hamikdash still functioned. He just had the people exiled from Jerusalem to Babel. But the Jews were gone. Later on, 11 years later, the new king, the king was Yehoiachin, and at that time, he actually destroyed the Beis Hamikdash as well and destroyed Yerushalayim. It's called the Chorves Yerushalayim. The 70 years don't begin from the Golus Yechonia, but they begin from the Golus Yehoiachin. Zog Rashi, Zog the Gemara, Frag the Gemara of Shapir Choshi, but he counted correctly. 70 years, what happened? How come the Jews didn't go back to Yerushalayim? And the Gemara says, Ihu nami miti toy. He also made a mistake. He should have counted from the destruction of Yerushalayim, not from the exile, from the destruction of Yerushalayim. Rashi explains, when was the Chorves Yerushalayim? That was Golus Tzidkiyahu. I think that maybe the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed the first time. I'm not sure. I said that as a fact, but maybe I have to check that. Maybe it was destroyed the full time. Maybe it didn't destroy Yerushalayim. Apparently, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed the first time around, but the Yerushalayim, the city, was left. But that was when in Golus Rashi says, the city was burned down. So I guess we can just look it up very easily. But in the we'll not look it up. But I think that the Beis Hamikdash was actually destroyed in the first exile, but the city was destroyed in the second exile. He says, "Uboy behed yiksiv." By him, it says there clearly, Yerushalayim boy leminna. You must count it from the destruction of Yerushalayim. How do we see this? The ksiv. The Sefer Daniel, this is what it says in the book of Daniel. Lemalois lechorves Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim shivim shana. Over there it says clearly to fill from the destruction of Yerushalayim. So the 70 years cannot be counted from when Yechonia went to exiles. They have to be counted from when Yehoiachin went to exile. The Golus Tzidkiyahu, when King Tzidkiyahu went to exile, which was later. Okay. So now, the Gemara is going to ask, okay, the Gemara still has an issue over here, because you're saying now they miscalculated. They miscalculated by 11 years, basically, because the Golus Yehoiachin took place 11 years after the Golus Yechonia, 11 years. The Chorves Yerushalayim took place 11 years later on. So you got to basically add to the 70 years another 11 years. In other words, after the third year of Achashverosh, you got to add 11 years. So if you have to have 11 years, so then technically, when should the Beis Hamikdash have been built? When should they have gotten permission? When should they have gone back to Yerushalayim? At the 14th year of Achashverosh's kingdom. Because on the third year, that was after 70 years, but then by the 14th year, Frag the Gemara, Soif, it still doesn't make any sense. Because they never built the Beis Hamikdash at the 14 years. Kama B'tzira. How much are we left over? Which means how much is left over beyond the 70 years now, according to Achashverosh's calculation. On the third year, he was short how much? He was short 11. Chad Srei, that's 11. Chad is 1, Srei is 10. Chad Srei means 11. Rashi calls it Chadesar. Shekach Omad. No, this is Rashi's in the wrong place. Chadesar Shekach Omad Habayis Achar Golus Yichonya. He says that this is the after the exile of Yichona, it was Chadesar. I'm wondering where is the I think Chadesar, I don't know what Rashi says it, that the Beis HaMikdash was after Golus Yichonya, but we're saying that it should have been, but that's not what actually happened. It happens. I'm not sure. I gotta go over that again. So the Gemara says like this: Ihu Achashverosh Kama Molach. How much was he king? Arbeisar. Let's see the Rashi. Ihu Kama Molach Arbeisar. How much was Achashverosh king for? Diksiv, he was king 14. Diksiv says in the pasuk, when did the decree of Haman that Achashverosh sent out? It says on the 12th year. The third year he made a party. On the 12th year he threw the lottery. The following year, the miracle took place a year later. Harayud Gimel. So that's 13 years. Because he was still then, because he decreed. Now, if you look in the pasuk, you see the pasuk says, when did he throw the lottery? That was done in the month of Nisan. When did the miracle of Purim happen? On Adar. If you start the year from Nisan, like the Jewish calendar, from Nisan first, and then you go to Adar, it wasn't actually a full year, and not a Jewish year, because the decree was sent on Nisan. The following year on Purim, on the 13th of Adar, that is when the Jews fought back. So it wasn't really a full year. So Rashi says, but the next year, but the Rashi says, as far as government of a king, the kings always start from Tishrei. So that means that it was its 13 years. If the 12th year was in Nisan, on Purim was already the 13th year. Rashi explains the Malchei Umas Olam b'Tishrei Maninon. Kings always count from Tishrei. So his new year became on Tishrei. So when did the 13th year of Achashverosh begin? On Nisan. Uksiv, and then it says, the Shana Acheres, he sent out the next year. So that was still, so that was the 14th year. Lekayim Asageres Apurim Hazois Hasheni. So he said that they should fulfill this second letter of the Purim, the Megilah, Harayudal. So we see this is the 14th year. So 14 years after 3 is 11 years. So the Gemara says, Bar Beisar Didei So on his 14th year, he should have built the Beis HaMikdash. So Einachanam is a little bit later, but he should still build on the 14th day. He should build the Beis HaMikdash. But he didn't build the Beis HaMikdash actually. Achashverosh never ended up building the Beis HaMikdash. Alom Aksiv. Why is it written in Ezra? It says like this: Badin betelas avidas beis elako the Yerushalayim. So the Navi was telling him that you are nullified. You're not allowing for the work in the Beis Halakot, the house of Hashem in Yerushalayim. This was already in the days of Kodesh, after Achashverosh. Badin, Zakt Rashi, this was been made Kodesh. He told him, Betelis Avidas Beis Halakot, that you have wasted. Shetziva Kodesh Limnos. Originally, Kodesh we meant before, he originally told them they can build. But then the Chazer boy al Yidei Tzore Yehuda ben Yamin. There were the enemies of Yehuda ben Yamin that snitched, slandered. So they stopped the building over there. It says the book of Ezra, Ad Shnas Tartin Lemalchus der Yovash Hasheni, until the second year of the Yovash Hasheni, Shemolach Achashverosh. So he was the second year of the Yovash. Rashi says, "V'nikra sholish shema." We call him the Yovash Kodesh Archashto. So the bottom line is, the Beis Hamikdash was not built until basically 16 years later. They should have been built, according to this calculation, by the 14th years of Achashverosh, because we only moved it up 11 years, because instead of the exile of Yechanya, you're doing the exile of Yoyachin, which was 11 years later. I don't know. You guys with me? I don't know. Are you with me with all the details here? All right, let's just finish. I don't hear any answers, but okay. We'll get over this Gemara with all the things. I mean, you need a chart, and you need the years, and you need the names, and you need the psukim, you need everything in order to get a full picture. But okay, but it'll be good for what we're doing now.
Do we have a chart in
Get the point. The point is here. Everybody miscalculated a little bit. The Gemara is trying to figure out where the miscalculation. The bottom line question now that we have, that we want to know is, how come? What's wrong with the calculation? So we say he made a mistake in 11 years, but the Beis Hamikdash wasn't built 11 years after the mistake. It was built 13 years after the mistake. What happened with the 2 years? Amar Rava answers, Shonim mukutois hoyuhava. They were chopped up years. Basically, the Gemara says 2 of the years were miscalculated over here, because 2 of the years were part in this one's kingdom and part in the other one's kingdom. So even though you calculated, but you counted 2 years, Achashverosh counted the 2 years, and it really wasn't 2 years. Now, I'm not sure what Achashverosh, I don't know, Achashverosh didn't go by the Pesukim, but he totally made it messed up. So we're talking about the real calculation. The real calculation, the Gemara says, Shoni Mukutois Hava, they were chopped years, which means, even though it says like in the 3rd year of this one, but it wasn't really a full year because the other person, let's see exactly. Rashi explains, Oisam Shonim Shemoninon Lamailo, those years that we have counted earlier, Yesh Mehem, Yesh Bahem, Shenivlu Mishal Achrim Berishim. There are those that were swallowed in the last one, the latter one of the first one. So basically that means that the one that comes followed, it's still the same year as the previous one. So while we're starting to count it as a year, but it's still that same year of the last one, of the one that previous year. So the later one shares 1 year with the one that previous than him. And that's how we got to the mistake. Keep going. He gives you an example. L'daryovesh hamodei. In the very beginning, we talked about 5 years. And Rashi said over there, we thought that it was 5 years. So over there, we counted for Daryovesh, the mother of Kodesh, Shamanina Lohein Shonim. We counted 5 years. Loitimtza Ladalad. Really, you can find only 4. It wasn't really 5 years, it was only 4 years. So we're cutting away one of those years. Timtzal Dalet. Diksiv. Bishnas achas l'Daryavish ben Achashverosh, and that's in the Sefer Daniel. So in the book of Daniel, it says that on the first year of Daryavish, the son of Achashverosh, and then it also says Bishnas Sholish L'Malchus Kodesh. What does this all mean? So he brings down these two psukim. Betanya b'Seder Olam. That's the Seder Olam. That's the book. I told you there is a book that goes through all the order of the world. So over there it says like this: Loi matzinu lemodai. This Daryavish Hamodai, we don't find Shono biksuvim elo zu bilvad. It's the only time we find it says on the first year of Daryavish. That was the only time Modai is mentioned over there. He gives you where is it? The Sefer Daniel Bishnas Sholos Malchus Kodesh. The Tanya Nami said we also learned that Kodesh Molach Sholoshon B'Katois. It's cut off years. How does Shemanis Shana you say that? He basically says there was only 4 years over there. There was no 5 years. So that's 1 year less. The Gamdi Bishnas Nebuchadnezzar Meroidach. Nivlo Shona. So basically, Ukenegdom Nishta Abinyan Shtayim Shona L'Daryavish. So basically, it was 2 years late because those were in the two calculations we said before. We're not going to go through that. The two calculations we did before, there was 2 years that were mistaken, and that's why it took another 2 years until they were returned from the exile. So basically, what we learn out from this, and we're going to go one more piece on the other side, and that's going to be sufficient. Then we're going to go back to interpreting the Megilah with other things. But basically, what he's saying over here, the 70 years to the destruction of Yerushalayim actually ended in the second year of Daryavish, the son of Achashverosh, and that's when the 70 years ended. And the fact that we calculated, we had miscalculation. We counted 5 years for Modai and Kodesh, it was only 4 years. And we counted for Evil Meroidach and Nebuchadnezzar, there was 1 year, and that was miscalculated. Okay, so now the Gemara brings also Tanya Nami Hachi. We also learned so in a Braisa to support. Rashi says the Bishnois Nebuchadnezzar, the Evil Meroidach Nivlo Shona. So he brings on another statement from the Seder Olam. There was another year for Bavel. So in other words, 1 year was the one that we said before. The Braisa said there was another year that was missing because they were swelled in. The Daryavish came and completed it. Let's look at the Rashi. So it says in Seder Elam. On that night, when Belshazzar went and used the Kalim, when he figured his mistake 70 years from the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar, so on that day, Belshazzar Malka was killed. And at that point, the Daryavish Mador Kabil Malchusay, he became the king after Belshazzar. So we have 70 years from when Nebuchadnezzar was king. And that was Shivim Chavasar Achas Miyem Shekibish Yoyakim. And this is 70 minus 1 because it says that Yoyakim he captured on the second day, on the second year of his kingdom. So he says, V'oid Shona Achas LeBavel, and then an additional year to Babel. The Malish Shivim Shonim Mishol Israel to fill 70 years when he was a dominant over Israel. So Daryavish made up the 1 year from Daryavish. Ba'acharov B'shon Acheres, and 1 year afterwards, Malach Kodesh B'Babel. So then Kodesh became the king. So he made up the 70 years for Babel. That was, so Nebuchadnezzar was missing 1 year because from the Babel, because he exiled him on the 2nd year. And then Daryavish was a king for 1 year. He made up. And then the following year, Kodesh became king of Babel. At that time, they were partially remembered because Kodesh allowed them, as we quoted before, Shenemar, he allowed them to go out of exile. Shenemar, Shamar, who's from the nation can go up. So Lamadnu, so what do we see from this Braisa? So here we see clearly that there was only 70 minus 1. We said there were 70 years, which were the 70 years. How did we get earlier 70 years? We counted the Memheid, the Nebuchadnezzar, the Gimel David Meredach, Ushleish the Valshetzar. So we have to say there's 1 year missing. So the Sonim Mektois that they were included some of the years, and that's why we had the extra year. Omar Rove says Rove. I just want to finish up this piece of Gemara. Even Daniel made the same mistake, like Achashverosh. The Ksiv, because it says in the Niltas base, Bishnas Achas Lamolchai, Ani Daniel benoisi b'sforim. In the first year of the kingdom of Daryavish, I started looking in the Sforim. Or I started looking in, not the books, in the numbers. The Gomer benoisi, since he says benoisi, so that tells us Miklal de Torah. That means I understood now that he made a mistake. This is the language of counting. He started making the numbers. So the Gemara said, but we have an independent question now. All right, this one made a mistake for that. But it seems to be a contradiction of the Psukim, because Ksiv, in Yirmiyah Chavtes, it says, Melois Lebavel. Over there it says, Rashi Ksiv Melois Lebavel. Shivin Shana Efkei Deschem Sefer Yirmiyah. In the same book of Yirmiyah it says, after Babel, not this destruction. Uksiv Lecharves Yerushalayim. But then we have a pasuk, the destruction of Yerushalayim. The Sefer Daniel, it says, Lamalos Lecharves Yerushalayim. Shivim Shana. Mispar Hashonim Ashahoyo. Dvar Hashem Yirmanovi. So it says clearly to the destruction. So not to Babel. So Marove Lipkido Be'almo. So when it says Melois Babel, Hashem says, I will remember you. That's not talking about remembering really to build the Beis Hamikdash. Just to remember them because he gave them a right, but they didn't actually go through with it. When he says, that's true. It says, first year of Kodesh Melech Poras, which was 70 years, as we said before, the 70 was made up with the first one that followed Daryavish was for 1 year, and then Kodesh. That was the 71st year after Yehoiakim was conquered, and that was Shaposhta Babel al Yisrael, when Babel over Yisrael. So you have Babel, actually that happened 70 years, but that wasn't a full remembrance. It was just a remembrance. He says he's going to give them a right to it. Behind it, it says in Ezra, Koi Omar Hashem, Kodesh Melech Poras. Koi Omar Kodesh Melech Poras. So says Kodesh, the king of Persia. Kol Mamlechos Oros Nasan Li Hashem Lekei Hashemayim. Hashem gave me all the governments of the whole earth, the God of the heavens. He told me to build him the house of Yerushalayim. So basically, that is called the remembrance. So when it says remembering to Bavel, that is talking that's short remembrance. And when it's talking about the Chorves Yerushalayim, that was the full return from the Beis Hamikdash. So basically, we know there's the various different things. I mean, I wish I have pretty much clear from all the different verses. It's not in order, the verses and the Gemara back and forth. I think I get the full picture, but it would be a lot easier if you have the picture and you have all the verses and you know exactly who was king for how many king. You know, we did it backwards. We did it from the Rashi. So we did it backwards, trying to figure out exactly. But the bottom line is, it needed to be 70 years, the Gemara says. But in one pasuk it says 70 years from when Babel conquered Yerushalayim. That happened. The Gemara says that happened when he announced that I should build a house in Jerusalem. But it didn't really materialize because then the enemies, they came and they spoke bad and they took away the right. They took away the Rishayon, they took away their right, so they no longer could build it. But I guess that is considered to be could be separate. All right, we'll leave it over here. We'll give her something about the parsha today, and hopefully the next piece of Gemara will get much easier. Regular Gemara, yeah. I think you're all ready for regular Gemara. But in any event, the challenge over here is because there's a lot of numbers and there's a lot of names and there's a lot of, so it's not just logic here. It's you got to just have a chart in front of you to see. Some people's minds can think abstractly, but most people need something in front of them in order to be able to clearly understand. But okay, we did as much as we could. Of course, this week's parsha is the portion of Vayichi. This is the Chazak. It's the last portion. And, it's interesting that the parsha begins. Yaakov lived in Egypt for 17 years. Now, 17 years. No, the number 17 is the gematria, the equivalent of Tov. Tes Vav Vez 9, 6, and 2 is 17. So it says that Yaakov lived in Egypt. His best years were the 70 years he lived in Egypt. You know, sometimes you can just exist. You're here, you exist because you're not dead. So you're dead, but you're not alive. Something Vayichi means you're more than just existing. You know, it's not just that you're not dead, but you're alive. There's a connotation is Yaakov lived. Yaakov lived in Tov 17 years, the good years. He lived in Egypt. It's a little surprising. Egypt was not known to be the most important place in the world. As a matter of fact, it was known to be a pretty promiscuous place. How is it that Yaakov lived his best years? Best years lived over there in Egypt. And, you know, the whole Parsha doesn't really talk about Yaakov's life. Most of the Parsha talks about, the fire Parsha talks about, he says to his son Yosef, I want you to swear to me that you're not going to bury me in Egypt, you're going to take me to the Marat Machpelah. And then he tells, he's bringing me his sons, he wants to bless them, he switches his hands, and then further they go and they bury him, they bring him back, and Yosef, his brothers are afraid that Yosef might retaliate against them at the end. And until the end, we learn about Yosef dying, and it's the end of the Parsha. So most of the Parsha does not actually talk about Yaakov's life. It talks about what happens after his life. So the way the Parsha is divided, it says first, Yaakov lived for 17 years, and with the Pasuk. Then it says the total years of Yaakov were 147 years. Now, in the previous parsha, we said that when he came to Pharaoh asks him, "How old are you?" He says, "I'm 130 years old." It almost seems like he's 130 years old, and then if the pasuk would have just said he lived for 147 years, we can figure out that it was 17 years that he lived in Egypt. The math is pretty simple. And what happens if the verse would have said that he just lived in Egypt for 17 years? You wouldn't know that total life was 147. I mean, that sounds pretty obvious. Commentaries explain that those 17 good years that he had were so much almost compensated for the 147 years, so that all of his life appeared at the end to be good, even though he suffered throughout his life with all the different troubles with his brother, with his uncle, with his daughter, with always trouble. Still, he lived 17 good years, and the verse tells you all of his life was 147. Basically, he lived, if you totaled it up, it was a good life. I say, what happens when somebody wins the lottery the last day of his life? What is he going to do with it? If you win it, you have enough time to use it. He lived for 17 years. He had 17 good, solid years that he lived. And that sort of made up for the 100 and 47, they were all good. But actually, it almost seems like this should be like the previous parsha talks about how the Jews were in Goshen and everything else, and over there, it should have said Yaakov lived 17 years, and this parsha should have started, Yaakov's life was 147 years, because it's after his life. But the true way of Yaakov's life, we can only tell what happens with him and his children in Egypt after his life. Because, while there's a lot of trials and tribulation in lifetime, but the fact when you come to a place like Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim had a culture. And the thing is that whenever we're in exile, we're sort of adapt to the environment around us. What is important in life? What is important to us? What's meaningful? I mean, inevitably, we are inundated through all kinds of means, through the media, through the neighbors, through our life. Everybody tells us what's important, that's important. So eventually, we begin to think like that. A Yid needs to know that important is to be close to Hashem. That's the most important thing. A Yid needs to know, a Jew needs to know that he has a mission. Hashem brought him to be a light unto the nations. He has to be a little different, not to get caught up and live and mimic the people around him, but he had to stand out, to be a pillar of light, to be a shine, to be an example, to be someone who teaches goodness and kindness. If you think about it, the whole world today doesn't appreciate the fact that the Jewish people are the ones that brought kindness, and throughout look at the Torah and Yiddishkeit, we brought to the world. I mean, we had this in Kentucky, you had this tornadoes. Look how much the country and the people are reaching out and helping. What is this? In the olden days, one country was in trouble, the other country didn't help. People were fighting each other. This whole concept of being there. So being there for others, this is something that is a responsibility of a Yid, to always remember their special mission in this world and life, and to be here. That's what is our mission. Our mission is to be Or Lagoyim, a light unto the nation, and not to get cut up. So, Yosef was a busy man. He was the viceroy to the government. He ran the country. Now, his brothers, they were shepherds. They lived with Yaakov. They studied Torah. They davened. They were holy people. They didn't get involved with the government. They didn't get involved. So it's no wonder that they stayed connected, because they went to shul all the time and they went to Beis Medrash all the time, and they did everything that they needed to do. So they were good Jews. But Yosef, he was busy from the morning to the night. He was holding up, he was sustaining the whole country. They didn't have any food over there. It was Yosef that kept them alive. And then Yosef has to raise his family in that environment over there. Can Yaakov's life, meaning can his message, can it survive? Can it survive that challenge of that culture? And that is Vayichi Yaakov, the real Yaakov's life. That's when he lived. That's when we know. At the end of his life, when he sees that Yosef is a tzaddik, notwithstanding that he is involved and he's busy, tzaddik. He sees that he raises a family who are connected. So this gives Yaakov a tremendous amount of nachas, a tremendous amount of strength, a tremendous amount of vayichi. It gives him life, because now all of a sudden he sees, yes, it's continuing. It's a very interesting piece of Talmud. And this week's parsha, when it talks about Yaakov passing on, it says vayigva. The word vayigva means he expired. It doesn't say vayomos, he died. Unusual. By Abraham, by Yitzchak, it says miso. Over there it says death. By Yaakov, it doesn't say he died. So what is the Gemara brings down opinion? Rashi brings it down in the Chumash. Yaakov Avinu lo yimeis, he didn't die. Yaakov didn't die. And the Gemara says, hey, wait a minute. What do you mean Yaakov didn't die? But it says in the pasuk that they embalmed him. It says that they eulogized him. It says that they buried him. They cried for him. What do you mean he didn't die? And the Gemara says one line. The Gemara says, Mazare b'chayim avhu b'chayim. His children are alive. He too is alive. You know, death, physical death, does not necessarily mean a cessation of life. It doesn't mean true life. True life. It's no, Hashem's seal is true. MS. Why is it MS? Aleph is the first letter, Tov is the last letter, Mem is the middle letter. Which means Hashem, Elikim MS hu Elikim Chaim. He's the true living God, and he's the true living God. Why? Because the life never stops. It goes through. From the Aleph, through the Mem, through the Tov, is always there. That is the sign of truth. Truth never stops. So if you come to an obstacle, and then it stops, then we question whether you were really alive. But when death comes upon you, physical death, the Torah says, Misa lo never by, but he didn't die. In other words, there's no cessation of life over there, because Yaakov keeps on living on through his children. Because Zarei B'chayim, his children are alive. Avu B'chayim, he's alive too. He continues. Because what's the message? What do you see? What happened after they came back from the burial? What did the children say? Oh, now they say our father died. And now Yosef is going to retaliate. Because our father was alive, he wasn't going to do anything. Because out of respect, but now that father is gone. But this is the whole thing is, father is not gone. I mean, Yosef says, no, it's not mace. Yaakov didn't die. We are still all brothers, and we're still all together. Unfortunately, there's a lot to learn from Yosef and his brothers, but, a lot of times after the passing, there becomes discontent in families. This is a pretty common phenomenon that people fight over inheritance, people fight over other stuff, and then even brothers or sisters that may have been close during the lifetime, which is also not so much today, people being close, but after the passing, they fall apart. But if you continue to live and you say he didn't die, that means that you continue to respect, you have that in your mind, in your heart, you know that that's still alive. So Yaakov's good life, Vayichi, comes in this parsha because seeing Yosef is the end of his life, and he sees what he accomplished, and he sees how it's strong. That gave him real nachas, that gave him life, and that gave him the energy, and that made all of his rest of his life also a real life. So Yaakov had that strong life, and after that we say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek. We should be strong and strengthened because, we all need to be strengthened. Because why do we say Chazak, Chazak? We finished the portion of the Chumash, and we thank Hashem for giving us the strength. But we need to re-energize and re-strengthen ourselves because each of us has, challenges, as everybody knows themselves best. We have our challenges, we have our difficulties, and the way to help each other is Ish Esre'eu Ya'azoru Ula'achiv Yemer Chazak. We support each other, and you say a shir like this that we get together, we learn together, we give over a parsha together. That gives us a little chizuk, and it's smack in the middle of the week. You have to wait till Shabbos to the rabbi's sermon, or you have to wait like this, the middle of the week, Tuesday. You get it in between, learn together and discuss together to get a little bit of energy, to get a little bit of strength. So Hashem will give us all the strength and bring us Mashiach until next week. And Mitzvah Hashem, we'll see you all. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed it. And the Mitzvah Hashem next week will be a little easier. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good week.